People of Earth, I am Michael Murphy, and welcome to the woods behind my house. Depending on where you grew up, whether it was a small town or a suburb, or even the city, those three places have one specific thing in common. There's usually always an urban local legend or an urban myth or a ghost story that goes along with that. On this series, I intend to investigate those kind of urban legends and find out if there's any truth behind them. On this very first episode, I'm going to delve into a story that I have a personal history with. This is the story of the Green Man. I grew up in the suburbs about 30 miles outside of Pittsburgh in the South Hills. And next to the township where I grew up was a place called South Park. And apart from being a suburb, most of South Park was that, an actual park. It had walking and bike trails and an ice rink, a few public pools, an animal preserve, and horse stables where they used to hold the annual summer fair up until the late 70s. I spent most of my summers and winters running around the woods with my friends or playing hockey at the ice rink. When we were teenagers, three of my friends and I decided to take a deep drive into the park to get to the bottom of a local legend we had heard about since we were children. That legend was the story of the Green Man. There are quite a few different stories about who the actual man was and if he did, in fact, exist. As the story goes, the Green Man had an accident that ruined his face. Some say he was a man working for the power company struck by lightning or shocked by a downed power line. Others suggest he was a factory worker splashed with acid. We had also heard that he was a condemned man who somehow survived the electric chair. Whatever the cause, all agree that the incident turned his skin green and melted his facial features together. Depending on who's telling the tale, the Green Man either died immediately or survived and holed up in a boarded-up house or a tunnel. This deformed man, also called Charlie No-Face, could be seen at night, blowing cigarette smoke through the holes in his cheek, lurking by the roadside, trying to stay out of sight. No one could ever quite agree with what the actual story was, but it boiled down to this. There was a man who may or may not have been a condemned criminal or just a regular person. One thing was always the constant fact. Whoever he was, he had suffered terrible injuries in some sort of electrical accident, but survived. But due to his injuries, his skin was turned a permanent shade of green. There was one other story that the South Park police told themselves. The police had informed us that back in the 30s, a man killed his wife and child in that tunnel with a hatchet. Then the man jumped in front of a train. Since then, people were reporting seeing a hatchet flying at them and hearing strange crying sounds. The police had quite a large file on the incidents. This Green Man escaped and fled into the woods, where the only place he could hide was an old abandoned train tunnel. Unfortunately, through the passage of time, I don't remember exactly what year it was, but I do remember that it was between 1985 and 1987. I'm not quite sure what time of year it was, but I'm almost positive it was the end of spring. I also can't remember exactly which of my friends were there, and yes, this did happen to me, but it's been close to 32 years since it happened, and with anyone, things get blurred over the years. These things matter later on. My friends and I found Dead Man's Tunnel quite easily because we had driven on that road quite a few times. We parked on the side of the road right past the first tunnel, Corvette Tunnel, and began our way up the hill where someone had told us the tunnel would be. The main part of this legend deals with the fact that you could see the Green Man if you walked to the back of the tunnel, but it had to be when the sun went down. As all kinds of these stories are meant to scare people, we weren't worried about seeing an actual ghost. We were in middle school at the time, and we weren't about to chicken out in front of each other. We were pretty sure it was nothing more than just another story to get teenagers either scared or interested. So when we reached the top of the hill, we were surprised to actually find the tunnel. It was also one of those stories that people could never agree on when it came to the real location of the tunnel. The sun was beginning to set, and I turned on the flashlight we brought, and my friends and I started into the tunnel. The tunnel itself had been abandoned years before and was closed off at the other end, but it was long and had a curve in the middle. As we went deeper into the tunnel, the light behind us began to fade, and we slowly walked through the curve, not quite sure what we might find on the other side. As we came around, we noticed the end of the tunnel had been closed off, but I remember some light coming through the wall, shining into the corner. As we got closer, we noticed the ground became louder, and as I flashed the light into the corner, we were stopped dead in our tracks. There, in the corner, was a green glow coming from something we didn't see at first. It was like slow motion. We all started stumbling backwards and turned to run when we heard a noise. And then we did run. As we got back into the light, we stopped and waited to see if something was chasing us. Nothing came after us. After waiting a few moments at the mouth of the tunnel, we decided to go back in. We noticed that the noise was just water dripping down the sides of the tunnel, and as we got back to the corner, I shined the light again, and we discovered what the source of this legend really was. The tunnel itself was used by the township to store rock salt for the winter months to use in the salt trucks. What we learned later was that the light coming through the cracks matched with the water, and a flashlight reflected off the rock salt and gave it a weird green glow. We were all laughing all the way back to the mouth of the tunnel. It wasn't until years later that we found out the real truth of the Green Man. And I was very surprised to find out the myth itself is based in actual fact. Yes, the Green Man was an actual human being, and his story is quite a tale to behold. Now, for the real story. Yes, the Green Man was a real human being. This is where the story becomes something a little more than just an urban myth. It also shows how a story can be handed down from truth and changed along the way, as well as traveling around the world in a sense. But it's also got a bit of a full circle vibe when it comes to my story, and I'll tell you why at the end. Of all the local legends in western Pennsylvania, the tale of Pittsburgh's Green Man is best known. It sounds like a classic boogeyman story, except for one crucial detail. It's mostly true. So much for the story. Here are the facts. For 50 years, right up until the 1980s, Raymond Robinson used to walk a lonely stretch of road between Cobble and New Galilee for exercise. He did this under the cover at night because of what happened to him way back in the summer of 1919. On a dare, the 8-year-old Raymond had climbed up the pylon that held the power lines for the Harmony Line trolley in Morado. A bird had built a nest there, and his buddies wanted to know if there were any eggs in it. Ray never saw the nest, or anything else ever again. He lost both his eyes in the incident, so he never got to see the Beaver Falls newspaper headline about what happened up that pylon. Morado lad, 8, shocked by live wire, will die. But he did prove the headline right or wrong. 2 months later, the Daily Times reported, in spite of all his affliction, the boy is in good humor. After a lengthy recuperation, Ray Robinson was released with a prosthetic nose connected to a pair of dark glasses that concealed his empty eye sockets. He passed his days listening to the radio, reading Braille, and making belts and wallets out of leather. He mowed the lawn with a manual loader and at night went for walks around Route 351. Word soon spread about the disfigured night hiker. Local teenagers began calling him Charlie No Face. People from further afar called him the Green Man, and folks began driving to the area just to meet him. Some nights there was such a flow of traffic to the road that police would be there to move things along. Generally, Ray would hide when he heard traffic approaching because of a few disrespectful types of teenagers, but some curiosity seekers befriended him, and he became to appreciate their company. They'd give him cigarettes and beer, and sometimes snap pictures with him. A variant on the story gives late-night thrill seekers a place to look for the green glow of their hero's skin. The accident took place near one of the many abandoned railroad tunnels in greater Pittsburgh, and that's where he ran to after his accident. Many different locations are touted as the site of Green Man's Tunnel, but the most popular is in the one in South Park, just off of Snowden Road, the site used, as I said before, by the township for storing rock salt. During the Vietnam War, draftees from the Pittsburgh area took these pictures with them, and so the legend of the Green Man spread across the theater of war and back to the United States. And their stories became more exaggerated as they were retold. They are still told to this day, even though Ray Robinson died more than 30 years ago on June 11th, 1985. He's buried in Grandview Cemetery in Beaver Falls near the site of his actual accident, but his legend walks on. Now, those are the facts. As I said at the beginning, I wasn't quite sure of the year, but I knew it was between 1985 and 87. And it's quite possible, if you have the imagination for suspension of disbelief for a bit, that my friends and I happened to be there on the evening of June 11th, 1985. Maybe that glow was Raymond finally leaving his ghost behind. The next time I decide to visit him, I'm going to do my best to go pay respects to the Green Man. Maybe I'll leave him a beer and a smoke for his troubles. Want to know more about this and other stories? Come back for our next episode. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the things that go bump in the night. I am Michael Murphy, and this is The Woods Behind My House.